New York, a city that smells of promises, garbage, and broken hope, always smelled to me, above all, of chlorine and exhaustion. I looked at myself in the mirror of a luxurious restroom on 43rd Street and saw not the Emilia who had arrived here 5 years ago from Bogota to study design. I saw a shadow. My hair was pulled back tightly, my uniform worn as if borrowed. I had just finished my third cleanliness shift of the day. Cleaning. Cash payments, no days off, no sick leave, no right to complain. Outside the window of that penthouse, I could see Manhattan. Shining towers piercing the sky like thousands of golden needles. I should have been one of those designing those towers. I had studied graphic design. My diploma now lay in my closet in Queens, a beautiful but utterly useless piece of paper. My student visa had expired 2 years ago. Now I was undocumented, just an invisible cog in the city's shadow economy. At 7 in the evening, I got on the subway. The car was hot, loud, and crowded. I closed my eyes, trying to conserve energy, because at 10 o'clock at night, my second job was waiting, washing dishes at a Thai restaurant. My phone rang. It was my mother, a WhatsApp call, our only means of communication. My heart tightened. It was time to put on the mask. My mother asked how I was and if I was eating well. I answered in a voice full of American optimism that I hadn't felt in a long time, telling her I had just left the library and was preparing for a very cool vacancy at a design company. I assured her that my visa would soon be extended and that everything would be fine. I lied about everything, but these lies were my currency, my gift. My mother had to believe that her daughter was conquering New York, not scrubbing someone's rust in a bathroom. Then she spoke about her condition, the chronic heart disease that required constant, expensive medication and possibly surgery. This was my true visa, my mission. For her to live, I had to stay here and work, sending dollars that, back in Colombia, turned into life-saving medicine. At the end of the call, my mother asked me not to worry about them and just to be happy. I replied that I was very happy, barely holding back tears. After the call, I leaned against the train window. I took out a neatly folded $100 bill from my wallet, kept separate from the others, like a relic. This was the latest payment for my mother's operation, which was due next month. I had saved this money cent by cent, skipping meals and ignoring the pain in my back. I got off at the Brooklyn stop, where I shared a tiny room with 2 other girls. There was an hour until the restaurant. I decided to walk to save $2.75 on the bus. Every cent mattered. I passed by cafes where people were laughing carelessly. They discussed vacations and new phones. They lived on the bright side of the bridge. I was on the shadow side. Reaching the kitchen of the Siamese West restaurant, I smelled the familiar scent of oil, curry, and hidden fear. Here, I felt a little safer among others like me. People who worked silently and quickly, trying not to attract attention. Mateo, my older dishwashing partner from Mexico, nodded and quietly warned me that there had been some sort of inspection that afternoon. My stomach clenched. Any inspection was a threat. Mateo explained they were only health inspectors, but the owner, Mr. Cheng, was angry. He warned that if we made even one mistake, he would find new workers. Mateo reminded me that thousands of people wanted this job, and I knew it. Even the worst, dirtiest job here was a privilege. I stood at the conveyor belt of dirty dishes. Hot steam, hot water, rubber gloves reeking of chemicals. The next 5 hours were sheer physical torment. My hands hurt, my back ached, but I worked like a machine, trying not to think. To think meant to feel meant to cry. Around 2 in the morning, when the flow of dishes slowed, Mr. Cheng approached me. He dryly announced that he needed someone to stay until 4 in the morning tomorrow to clean the basement. He offered an extra $30, but warned that no one else should know about it, and there should be no complaints. $30, the price of my sleep, but also the necessary amount for my mother's next batch of medication. I quietly agreed. Mateo looked at me with pity. He knew it was exploitation, but none of us could refuse. At 3 in the morning, I walked out into the completely empty streets of Brooklyn. Here, in this part of the neighborhood, there were no neon signs, no police. There was only me and my fear. I walked past dumpsters, peering into every shadow. Every slow-moving car seemed like an immigration vehicle. I reached our house, climbed to the 3rd floor, and quietly opened the door. I collapsed onto my old, sagging mattress, unable to take a shower. I picked up my phone again and looked at my mother's photo. I didn't call so as not to wake her but sent a short message. "Everything is fine, I'm fine, I love you very much. I'll send you money tomorrow." Feeling a tear roll down my cheek, I quickly wiped it away. I couldn't cry. Tears wasted energy. I closed my eyes. I still needed to raise $1,000 to fully cover the next batch of my mother's medication and rent. One more month, maybe a little more. At that moment, I felt not only physical pain. I felt what it was like to live without a name. Here in New York, I wasn't Emilia who loved to draw sketches and read. I was the dishwasher, the cleaner, the undocumented. I was seen, but I wasn't noticed. I was scared not of deportation. I was scared that when I finally could return home, I wouldn't remember who the real Emilia was. Would anything be left of her but this exhausted body and empty promises? I clenched my fist. No, I was here for my mother. I had to hold on. I got up to drink water and looked out the window. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, Manhattan was shining, but I only saw the shadows it cast. And I knew I was one of them. The next 2 weeks turned into a blurred marathon of chlorine and grease. I barely slept. The $30 extra I earned in the dirty basement proved insufficient. An unexpected factor. The currency exchange rate in Colombia dropped again, meaning my money earned here was suddenly worth less there. To cover the same batch of my mother's medication, I now needed $200 more. Panic was a cold, sharp needle that ran through my chest. I realized I needed a third job. Louis, my roommate who worked as a bicycle courier, suggested a night bakery in Queens. The job was from 11 at night to 5 in the morning, packaging freshly baked bread. This meant I would be working almost 20 hours a day, with short breaks for travel. It was madness, but wasn't my life already mad? I went for the interview at the bakery. The female owner, herself an immigrant from Europe, took one look at my exhausted eyes and asked if I had papers. I replied that the papers were being processed, the standard half-truth everyone used here. She nodded, but her gaze was full of understanding. She knew what was going on. She hired me. My life turned into cycles. Dawn, cleaning rich apartments in Manhattan. Day, travel and a short, futile attempt at sleep. Evening, dishwashing in Brooklyn. Night, packaging bread in Queens. I rarely saw the sun. I turned into a night creature hunting for dollars. One evening, as I was returning from Manhattan, I had to walk through the university campus. The same university where I dreamed of studying, then graduated from, but couldn't realize my potential. I hurried head down when suddenly I heard a name, Emilia. I froze. It was a name that belonged to another person, another story. I looked up. Alejandro stood before me. He had been my course mate in Colombia. We came here together on the student visa. He had a perfect, smiling face, dressed in an expensive suit. He was holding a briefcase. Alejandro was in the U.S. legally. His family was wealthy. He had managed to apply for a work visa, and now he was a successful designer at a major firm, the kind I had lied so much about to my mother. I felt my face burn with shame. He saw me, sweating in this worn uniform with a bag full of cleaning supplies. I was his shadow. He joyfully exclaimed that he couldn't believe he was seeing me. He asked about my career, how I managed to get the visa. He said he heard I had opened my own studio. I forced a smile, feeling hypocrisy constricting my throat. I quickly invented a new lie. I said the studio existed, but it was small, and I took this cleaning consultant job to research design chaos. It sounded ridiculous, but I hoped he would believe it. Alejandro didn't quite believe it, but he was polite. He regretted that he couldn't talk longer and asked if we could grab coffee sometime. "Of course, I'll call you," I replied, knowing I would never answer his calls. When he left, I barely held back the urge to cry. He was living proof of what I should have become. I had lost not just a career, I had lost my place in the world. And through this loss, I felt a deep, almost physical understanding that America was a land of opportunity only for those who already had money and papers. For me, it had only become a land of survival. But the worst part was that he asked me to send his regards to my mother, saying she should be proud of me. I had no right to disappoint her. This realization forced me to move forward. That night in the Thai restaurant kitchen, exhaustion nearly knocked me out. I was slow. I dropped a plate. It shattered with a loud, deafening crash. Mr. Cheng rushed over. He didn't yell. He just looked at me coldly. He said that for every broken plate, I had to work 3 hours without pay. And he added that if this happened again, he would be forced to inform the authorities about my paper problem, implying he knew I was undocumented. My stomach clenched with anxiety. This was blackmail, direct and ruthless. I was trapped. I stood over the shattered pieces of the plate, feeling my legs tremble. I simply responded quietly that I would be more careful, realizing that he now held my life in his hands. I didn't sleep that night. After the bakery, at 5 in the morning, I sat on a cold park bench to rest for a bit. I picked up my phone again and saw a message from my mother. She wrote that she was feeling worse. She told me not to worry, but I knew it was her way of saying that time was running out. My work schedule, which was already hellish, became unbearable. I barely slept, and when I closed my eyes, I only saw blurry faces. Mr. Cheng's severe eyes, my mother's worried face on the phone screen, and Alejandro's surprise. I started confusing the days of the week. Even the simplest tasks, scrubbing wine stains in an apartment or packing baguettes at the bakery, required colossal effort. I knew that physically I was at my limit. One morning, cleaning a bathroom in an expensive loft apartment, I nearly passed out from exhaustion. I grabbed the sink, breathing heavily, trying to control the trembling in my hands. If they had found me there, unconscious, it would have been the end. The owners would call an ambulance, and an ambulance meant questions about documents. It was at this moment, when I felt most vulnerable, that Mateo, my dishwashing partner, approached me with a cautious look. He told me about an opportunity. He said a friend of his was looking for a reliable person for one special service. He emphasized that it paid very well and would only take one night. $500, he whispered, looking at the floor. That will be enough for your mother's medicine for 2 months. $500. That was an amount I earned in 2 weeks of inhuman labor. I felt the number blind me, like a lighthouse in the dark. I asked him what exactly needed to be done. Mateo hesitated, but eventually told me. It involved transporting packages to the Bronx late at night. He said it wasn't drugs, just something illegal related to smuggling alcohol or something similar that small gangs were involved in. He assured me it wasn't dangerous, just a matter of delivering a bag quickly and returning. My conscience screamed. I had never done anything like this. I had always lived honestly, even when my honesty cost me sleep and dignity. But the thought of my mother, her weak heart, and the lack of medicine overrode my inner voice. I imagined sending that money. I imagined my mother receiving it and the relief on her face. It was my duty. It was my justification. I agreed. Of course, I asked Louis, my courier roommate, to lend me his old, battered bicycle for the trip, explaining I had an urgent, large bread delivery. He, unaware of the truth, happily agreed. The next night, instead of going to my shift at the bakery, I met Mateo. He handed me a heavy, dark gray backpack. The backpack was oddly heavy and had an unpleasant smell, not alcohol. Mateo told me not to open it and quickly disappeared into the crowd. I felt anxiety turn into pure, cold horror. The moment I got on the bike, I became a criminal. I felt utterly exposed, as if put on display for the whole city. Every car headlight, every passerby, they were potential witnesses to my mistake. I pedaled hard through Brooklyn, trying to reach the Bronx. The wind whistled in my ears, and for the first time, I felt not physical but moral fatigue. I was cycling on a crime to pay for my sick mother's medication. It was the complete fall of my ideals. As I rode under the Brooklyn Bridge, I saw headlights approach. It was a police car. My mind instantly went blank. I couldn't outrun them, the bike was too slow, and the backpack too heavy. I simply steered the bike to the side, dropped it, and darted into a dark, narrow alley between warehouses, clutching the backpack tightly to my chest. I ran, feeling sweat drench my face. The police car drove past. They didn't seem to notice me, but that episode forever changed my fear. Before, I feared deportation. Now, I feared prison. Prison wasn't just deportation, it was shame. It was the inability to ever help my mother again. I ran to the prearranged spot, a neglected, moonlit parking lot. A man in a dark jacket was waiting for me there. He didn't smile, just nodded. I handed him the backpack. He didn't even check the contents. He simply handed me a thick envelope with cash, $500. I felt my hand was dirty. The money was sticky. It smelled of risk. I returned to Brooklyn before dawn. When I finally reached our room, my legs couldn't hold me. I poured the money onto the bed and stared at it. It was my salvation and my cursed price. Finally, I sat down and called my mother. She was weak, but her voice was joyful. She said her condition had improved, and the doctor said the new medicine had finally started working. I felt immense relief, which was as powerful as the guilt. I did it for her. I sacrificed my morality for her life. I sent the money. Afterward, I went to my morning shift to clean someone's apartment. And as I stood by the window, looking at the carefree Manhattan, I felt completely isolated. I realized that although this money saved my mother, it split me in two. One part of me was a daughter saving her family. The other was a criminal living in fear. In this city, under the shadows of its magnificent bridges, I was no longer just undocumented. I was a person with a secret, and that secret was heavier than any backpack I could carry. A week passed. I lived in constant expectation of a call, a knock on the door. Every siren in Queens made my heart pound like a drum. I couldn't concentrate. I made mistakes at all 3 jobs. Finally, Mr. Cheng called me over. His face was completely calm, which was worse than anger. He said that a theft had occurred at his restaurant. A significant amount of cash was missing from the register. He dryly informed me that the police had already been there and spoken with some employees. He added that while he didn't suspect me, he would be very sorry if my paper problem surfaced during this investigation. His hint was obvious. He was demanding my silence and complete subservience in exchange for his protection from the police. I felt I had fallen into a new trap, much deeper this time. My undocumented status made me a target not only for exploitation, but also for covering up crimes. I could end up in prison not for my mistakes, but for someone else's. This was my moment of revelation. I realized that New York would not let me go. It would suck everything out of me until only an empty shell remained and then discard me. That same night, sitting on the floor in my tiny room, I looked at my mother's photo again. She was feeling better, her health had stabilized. My mission was accomplished for the time being. I made the hardest decision of my life. I had to go home. This decision was both a relief and a destruction. It meant the end of my American dream, but also the end of my inhuman life in the shadows. I wrote my mother a long, honest, but gentle message. I told her that I was tired, that the visa would not be extended, and that New York was not what she imagined. I assured her that I was returning not in defeat, but with money for treatment and a new plan. Louis helped me buy a plane ticket. It was expensive, but it was the final bridge between my past and my future. I didn't say goodbye to Mateo, so as not to put him at risk. I left Mr. Cheng only a short note. I took the subway to John F. Kennedy Airport for the last time. I looked at people's faces. They were indifferent, hurried. They didn't know that here, in this car, sat a person who wasn't just leaving, but fleeing her own life. At customs, I approached the officer with my expired passport and a pounding heart. I knew that interrogation, a fine, and a black mark awaited me. I simply handed over my passport and said quietly, but firmly, that I was returning home. The process was long and humiliating, but it was the final stage. Finally, I was cleared to proceed. As the plane took off, I looked down at New York. It shone like a massive, cold diamond. I felt neither anger nor regret. I felt a deep understanding. I realized that New York was not evil. It was just a city. A soulless mechanism that didn't see people, only their labor. I was here to save my mother, and I did it, but the price was my identity. Now I was going home. I was no longer a dreaming student. I was a woman with scars who knew the true cost of $1 and the true cost of survival. I would return home to my mother. I would look for a job in my own country, using that money as startup capital. It would be hard, but I would be home on the bright side of life, where there is law and where I have a name.